Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our non-Shabbos Shabbat HaGadol Zoom Derasha. And I was joking before, but seriously, thank you for taking the time to join us. It's a busy week. And if you're multitasking and doing something at the same time, that's wonderful as well. Hopefully, I'll be clear enough so you can follow. And I look forward to learning with everyone this evening. Before I begin, we want to thank the sponsor for the Shabbat HaGadol Derasha. Thank you to Dr. Richard Shechtman, who is sponsoring in memory of Debbie's father, Jacob Hellman, Yaakov Ben Sion Zichrono Levracha, whose yahrzeit will be occurring this coming Shabbat, Eir of Pesach. So thank you very much, Dick. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure somebody give me a thumbs up. You can hear me all right? Okay, wonderful. Okay, and it's wonderful to see people, see names, faces. Feel free to send a Chag Kasher V'Sameach message to someone in the chat. Use this opportunity just to see people and stay connected. The title of the Derasha is No Chametz, No Matzah. Why is Eir of Pesach this year and every year so crazy? And what does it have to do with our pandemic lives today? If you're not aware, you should be aware, and you'll definitely be aware after tonight. This year, Eir of Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, occurs on Shabbos, which creates a complicated and disputed day, how best to most properly observe it. And we're not going to get into so much the really practical nitty-gritty of what to do, how and when. We sent out a guide about that. We've discussed it. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. But this evening, hopefully, we're going to drill down and beneath all those details, discover the much deeper principles and ideas, and I believe there is something quite valuable to discover. I'm going to begin, before we look at the source sheet together, to share with you an event which is recorded in the Talmud, which is the earliest recorded example in our rabbinic literature of a Shabbos Shechalios be'Erev Pesach, or Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos, when the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And the story goes as follows. The Talmud records that about 60 years before the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, just a little bit after the turn of the millennia, based on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they saw that Erev Pesach would be Shabbos. Now, at the time, a great number of the most senior sages on the Sanhedrin came from one family, the Beseira family, referred to as Bnei Beseira or Ziknei Beseira. And they realized they could see that Erev Pesach would be Shabbos. And in the days of the Beis HaMikdash, the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, was the day that the Karban Pesach was offered, was slaughtered, its blood sprinkled on the Mizbeach. And they actually were not sure. A great debate erupted whether or not the Karban Pesach could be offered on Shabbos. We do offer communal sacrifices on Shabbos, the regular daily sacrifice, the special sacrifices for holidays. On the other hand, private individual sacrifices are not offered. If I had a vow I wanted to fulfill, I cannot fulfill that on Shabbos. But what about the Karban Pesach? It is sort of communal. We're all doing it, but we fulfill it individually or in small groups. Could the Karban Pesach be offered on Shabbos? And they actually were not sure. And they investigated, they debated, they could not come to a conclusion, and Pesach was approaching, and they didn't know what to do. And so someone shared with Bnei Beseira, the elders of the time, and said, there is a relatively young scholar who recently moved to Jerusalem from Babylonia. And he's not really well known yet, but we hear they say that he's a great sage. And perhaps maybe he has a tradition coming from Babylonia that we're not aware of. And so the elders of Beseira, the leaders of the Sanhedrin, said, please bring him to us. And please tell us, what is his name? And it was reported to them, they said to them, his name is Hillel. The famous great Hillel Hazakin, Hillel the elder. Hillel was born in Babylonia, moved to Israel. And so Hillel comes to Sanhedrin and he tells them, yes, you are to offer, it's permitted and thus obligatory to offer the Karban Pesach on Shabbos, when the 14th of Nisan falls in on Shabbos like this year. Apparently it hadn't happened for so many years. Perhaps they would adjust the calendar so it couldn't happen, and they didn't know what to do in Jerusalem. They did not have a tradition. And Hillel came and proved to them that yes, it is to be offered. And there's a fascinating back and forth, which we don't have time to get into, but they accepted Hillel's ruling, and apparently they were so overwhelmed by Hillel's scholarship and that he could solve this halachic problem for them. So the Bnei Beseira, to their credit, resigned from the Nasias, from being the Nasi, the president, the highest seat of the Sanhedrin, and they gave it to Hillel, who they didn't even really know until relatively recently. And this is a story of how Hillel initially gained prominence and became the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. It was because there was a halachic conundrum, different than ours today. But apparently, when Shabbos and Erev Pesach coincide, there's some sort of contradiction. They didn't know how to navigate it. They didn't know how to resolve it. And Hillel knew how to put together Erev Pesach and Shabbos, and this was his great accomplishment that made him gave him the highest seat on the Sanhedrin. And so one of the many lessons we can learn from this story is Erev Pesach, Shechalios B'Shabbos, like this year, was always a rare occasion. And it was always a day that created problems and questions and issues that were debated. And it was debated throughout the Mishnah and the Gemara after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash of how to act in such a year, how to dispose of chametz, whether it's regular chametz, truma chametz. And even today, there are different opinions. There are differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim of what to do on this coming Shabbos. And even within each group, there are different opinions of what is the correct way to do it, what is the best way to do it. And that is because there are complex competing values and halachos, and also because since it's such a rare occasion, perhaps the issues were never fully resolved. And so tonight, we're going to try to better understand what are some of the issues of this unique calendar occurrence, Erev Pesach, Shechalios B'Shabbos, and hopefully discover some very fascinating ideas. There are three halachos unique to Erev Pesach that govern the day, and that we must apply to, in this year, to Shabbos. The first comes from the Torah, is rooted in the Torah, is the Torah halacha, and the second two are rabbinic enactments. The first halacha is that after midday, after noon, it is forbidden to eat or to own chametz. And the reason for that is because the Karban Pesach could be offered in the afternoon, anytime after noon. And thus, once you can offer the Karban Pesach, you have to have already rid yourself of your chametz. You can't own or be eating chametz as you're offering the Karban Pesach. And even today, we understand there's a Torah prohibition to eat or own chametz from midday on. Now, the rabbis pulled it 2 hours early because if you're looking up, it's not always so easy to determine exact noon, especially if it's cloudy or raining. So they made it 2 hours early. So in Brookline, that's 10:45. On Shabbos, the last time to eat chametz is 10:45 a.m. Okay, so, but the basic Torah rule is you cannot eat chametz after midday. For our purposes, there's not a lot more to say about that. The second halacha is that the rabbis enacted that Erev Pesach, it is forbidden to eat matzah. Some have the custom to not eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, from 30 days before, from Purim. Those are customs. But there is a real halacha, rabbinic enactment. You cannot eat matzah anytime on Erev Pesach, the day of Pesach. Now, what is the reason for that? The Talmud doesn't really exactly say. I'm going to let someone unmute themselves and tell me, why can you not eat matzah on Erev Pesach? Something that you've learned before, or just your own thoughts right now?
So you can be excited to eat the matzah.
Thank you. Excellent, Donna. So you can be excited to eat the matzah. Now, that is generally the answer that is given, and that is not a wrong answer, but it is not a completely correct answer. Philippe, let me keep going because that was the answer I'm looking for, but there'll be more opportunities.
All right. So
halacha number 2 is that you cannot eat matzah anytime the entire day. The third halacha is that the rabbis instituted a prohibition that the end of the day, the last half of the afternoon, from 3 p.m. and on, you're really not supposed to eat much at all. You can't eat hamotzi for sure. You can't have mizonos. You shouldn't really have wine or grape juice. You're allowed to have really minor snacks, things that are shahakol, borei pri hadama, borei pri ha'etz. You can have fruits and vegetables, a little chicken. But even those items, the Shulchan Aruch says, quoting the Rambam, you shouldn't fill yourself with it. So you shouldn't have, wonderful, I don't know, vegan meal that totally fills you up, even though it's only shahakol or hadama or ha'etz. You can have small amounts of such foods. So we have 3 halachos. Let's briefly review them. You can't eat chametz after midday or 10:45 a.m. nowadays. You can't eat matzah the entire day. The last 3 hours, you really shouldn't even have much snacks, just some small snacks. And this is what makes the day so crazy, makes us hungry on every Erev Pesach. There's not a lot to eat. And especially on Shabbos, this is why we have to wake up early and daven early so we can have our first meal, because you can't have chametz after 10:45 and you can't have matzah the entire day. So you have to have your meal more or less before 10:45 a.m. Okay, now my contention that I will argue with you here tonight, that I'll hopefully convince you, is that even though we have 3 halachos and each halacha has its own source and to some degree its own reason, but the 3 of them are meant to work together. And when our sages put all of this together, they understood that each of these halachos, does not exist in a vacuum, but exists simultaneously and with these other halachos, and together they create a unified experience. There's a thread that unites all of them. And Chazal were using these 3 separate halachos to create a certain kind of day for us. And it is that kind of day that the lesson of the day, the meaning of the day, what we're supposed to experience that day, that is what we're going to hopefully discover this evening. Okay, with that, we are going to begin looking at our sources. And I think, even though I would prefer to still see everyone's faces, whom I can see, but I have a feeling many people prefer for me to share my screen. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, so let's share the screen, but we'll take it off the screen share at different points. Okay, here we go. Hopefully everyone sees this. Give me 1 second. I'm just want to enlarge how many people I can see. Okay. All right. Source number 1. If you're doing Daf Yomi, this will be familiar. This is the opening Mishnah of last parak in Maseches Pesachim. Here we go. You have English and Hebrew for everything. Arvei Pesachim, on the eve of Pesach. Samach lemincha, again, that means the end of the afternoon. Lo yochol adam ad shetachshach. A person should not eat until it is dark. This is what we said. The end of the afternoon, you're really not supposed to eat much at all. The Gemara says you can have some minor snacks, fruits and vegetables, some chicken, but don't fill yourself. Why are you not allowed to eat? Why did the rabbis institute this prohibition not to eat towards the end of the day? Rashi explains as follows. Lo yochel, a person should not eat at the end of the afternoon. Kedei sheyochel matzah shel mitzvah l'te'ava. In order, so he'll be a little hungry, and he or she will eat the matzah for the purpose of the mitzvah l'te'ava, with an appetite. Mishum Heir mitzvah. In order to beautify the mitzvah, in order to enhance the mitzvah. Now, on a basic level, we can understand this. Every mitzvah we should perform with a sense of joy, with a sense of pleasure. It shouldn't be like a burden. It shouldn't be like we're being forced. So if a person would enter the Seder and they'd be totally stuffed and they're forcing themselves to eat the matzah and they're really not enjoying it, and you can see this is somewhat painful. So obviously that's not a nice way to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah or any mitzvah. So the sages said, we think we're going to make it prohibited to eat towards the end of the afternoon, in order that you'll have an appetite, and so you'll eat the matzah with an appetite, and you'll enjoy the mitzvah. And the way Rashi presents it, it will be a Heir mitzvah. It will be a more beautiful mitzvah. Now, stop sharing the screen. Does anyone have a quick question or comment with this, or is this self-evident, straightforward?
Well, this was obviously done before we were having Pesach on daylight savings time, where you don't really eat until about 10, 11 o'clock or so, or whatever.
Why? What do you mean? Because they're eating earlier?
At that point, you're really very hungry.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Well, obviously, Shabbos creates a problem now because you're not supposed to
fast or be hungry on Shabbos.
Or normally Avshal Shidduch towards the end of the day. We'll get to Shabbos. Okay, before we get to Shabbos. A couple of questions on this Mishnah. It is clear, the Gemara makes explicit that this is a halacha specific to Erev Pesach. There is no such prohibition to not eat Erev Shabbos, the last 3 hours of Friday, or any other Erev Yantiv. So the question is why? Why is there a prohibition specifically for the night, the Seder night, to eat matzah with an appetite? There's a mitzvah to have a meal Friday night in honor of Shabbos. That also presumably we should eat with an appetite and enjoy it and not feel like we're stuffing ourselves. So why didn't the sages enact a prohibition for Erev Shabbos or Erev Yantiv? Now to that, I'm sure some of you very learned people will say, well, there's a difference. Say on the Seder night, there's a mitzvah from the Torah to eat matzah. There's not quite a Torah mitzvah in the same way to eat a meal Friday night. So for Seder, that's a Torah mitzvah. The rabbis really wanted to make that special. So they said, don't eat, have an appetite. They didn't impose that on Friday night or a regular Yantiv. That's a fair point, whoever was thinking that. But it's not so simple. Through all comments of the later commentaries, the Achronim, there is one other night where there's a Torah mitzvah to eat. When is there another night in the year when there's a Torah mitzvah, a Torah command to eat?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur.
Okay, that's not what I was thinking. I mean at night, once it's already nighttime. That's when it's still afternoon. When it's nighttime.
Shavuos.
No, a Torah mitzvah.
Torah mitzvah.
Motzei
Yom Kippur.
No.
No,
That's not what I'm thinking. The first night of Sukkot. The Gemara learns that from Derasha. Tesov 15:15. There's a mitzvah, just like there's a mitzvah to eat the Seder night. So too, there's a mitzvah, a commandment to eat in the Sukkah, the first night of Sukkot. Any other night, if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. But the first night of Sukkot, you must eat. So if there's a Torah mitzvah to eat the first night of Sukkot, why is there not also a prohibition, Erev Sukkot, not to eat, so that you'll eat with gusto, so that you'll enjoy the mitzvah? It'll be a mahuder mitzvah eating in the sukkah. The truth is there are some who are strict for that. But the simple reading of the Gemara is that this is unique for Pesach. It does not apply to Sukkot. So why not? Why did the rabbis impose this only Erev Pesach? That is question number one. Why is this prohibition only Erev Pesach?
Because there's a specific Pesach food, which is matzah, but not a specific Sukkot food.
Very interesting point, Vern. That definitely is possible. That definitely is possible. Question number two. Question number two. The rabbi said, don't eat Friday, lest something bad will happen. What? You'll eat matzah too full. What kind of category rabbinic rule is that, or rabbinic enactment? What do we normally call it? Don't do this. The rabbi said, don't do this, lest something might happen. What is that normally called?
Putting a fence. Putting a fence.
Thank you.
Gezerah.
The rabbis make fences, but let's think about this fence. This is absolutely unique. What are the rabbis' concern here? The rabbis' concerns are, according to Rashi, at least, you will eat towards the end of the day, Erev Pesach. You will not have an appetite, and you will eat the matzah, but without an appetite. So what? So you still did the mitzvah. So you're right. You ate it without a smile, without energy. So it's not, there's lacking in the hitter mitzvah. It's not the mitzvah in the most beautiful way, but you did the mitzvah. So what are we saying here? We're saying the rabbis made a fence, not to protect you from violating a Torah prohibition, not from protecting you from not fulfilling a Torah mitzvah. The rabbis made a fence lest chas v'shalom, you won't do a mitzvah with a hitter mitzvah. As far as I know, there is no other such example in all of rabbinic literature, where in halacha, where we have a fence to protect just hitter mitzvah. Where do we find that? We don't find that the rabbis make fences to protect a hitter mitzvah. So that's question number two. Why would they make a fence here? This is somewhat surprising when you think in those terms.
Okay. Shofar.
Say it again. Who said something?
Shofar.
What about that? What about shofar?
We don't do it the day before we blow.
That's a minhag, though. That's not really asur midrabanan. Not to blow the day before. Okay, let us go back to our screen share. Now we'll bring in Shabbos, as Jerry started bringing in. Again, Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos, what to do when the 14th of Shabbos is discussed in the Gemara explicitly and debated. Psachim 13a. Arba Asar Shechalios b'Shabbos. When the 14th of Nisan falls out on Shabbos. Mivarin es hakol milifnei Shabbos. You have to get rid of all of your chametz, or almost all of your chametz. We will do. Our houses will be kosher for Pesach, Erev Shabbos. Umishayrin mazon shtei sudos. But make sure to leave over. Hold on one second. Did I lose everyone?
No,
1 second, I can't.
No, we're here.
we hear
Okay,
you.
I don't see all of
Okay.
you guys. Okay, whatever. When I turn off the, hold on 1 second, everyone. 1 second, my computer's acting up. But you leave over 2 meals. 1 second, everyone. I'm not sure what's going on here.
It's working.
I know this, for some reason it's not letting me open up my window of the Zoom.
Yeah, but we see you.
I know I can't see any of you guys. Hold on, let me just see if this will work. Yeah. 1 second. Umashirin, I'm just doing this by heart. Mazon shtei seudos. You leave over 2 meals. Can you guys see me now? I don't know what's going on here.
We can see
We
everything.
could see it the whole time.
Yeah, no, I don't. For some reason, it's not letting me. Boy, we were just getting to a dramatic part.
Maybe cancel the screen share and then bring it
That's the
back.
problem. I
Keeping
can't get
us
to
in
I can't get to the
suspense.
screen share. I can't get to
It was something just flashed.
That's the,
Rabbi, is the problem that you're in full screen mode? Is that why you can't?
I'm not quite sure.
That could be.
Let's see.
We're now seeing your announcement of tonight's lecture.
Hit Alt Tab. That way you can switch between things. That might help. Hit Alt Tab and you'll see a menu come up where you can switch between applications.
let's hold tab.
Alt tab.
Oh, alt tab.
Alternate the Alt key
Yes.
plus the Tab key.
Yeah, that will
Aye.
usually, that will progress you through the various windows that are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's who we are.
Oh, he
We
was.
lost them.
I guess well,
I'll be back.
He'll be back.
Oh, there you
Oh, there
are.
he is.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Okay, I apologize. Okay. Hopefully we won't have that again. So let's go. I'm nervous to share my screen again, but let's try this one more time and
Should work.
hopefully this will I'm sorry everyone. Quite frustrating for me.
We do have a copy of it. It came in as an email. The link.
Let's try this. Okay, now it's good. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so let's continue. So again, reading Psachim 13a. Arba Asar Shechalios b'Shabbos, when the 14th of Nisan is on Shabbos, try to get back into it. Mivarin es hakol milifnei Shabbos. So you have to get rid of all your chametz before Shabbos. Umishayrin mazon shtei sudos, but you leave over enough chametz for 2 meals. Which 2 meals? Someone just yell out, which 2 meals? Friday night and Shabbos morning. Kedei lechol ad arba sha'os. And so you'll have the food to eat up until the 4th hour of Shabbos morning, when chametz is from then on prohibited. So you leave over enough food for 2 meals. So what's the question?
He didn't, yeah,
It's
apparently.
Shabbos. There needs to be a 3rd meal.
Apparently they didn't hold that you needed to have.
Okay, so let's see. So Rashi.
Oh, yeah, there's a Rashi.
So let's see.
there.
Rashi. Mazon shtei sudos. You have 2 meals. You leave over food for 2 meals. Velo shalosh, not 3. Dekol shalosh sudos to Shabbos, because the 3 meals of Shabbos are Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha. You're supposed to eat it Friday night, Shabbos morning day, and Shabbos afternoon. The Heir of Pesach aser lechem and minchol mala. And Heir of Pesach you can't eat in the afternoon. Okay, you can have fruits and vegetables, but that's not good enough for Rashi for Shalosh Shudas. Rashi holds Shalosh Shudas this week is canceled. There is no Shalosh Shudas. Others hold like Rashi also. It's impossible to square Shabbos and its 3 meals with the halachos of Erev Pesach. You don't have Shalosh Shudas this week. Now, some may know that in the Shulchan Aruch it says, well, have some fruit and vegetables in the afternoon. That at least fulfill Shalosh Shudas for some. We normally don't like relying on that. You normally should have bread or at least mazonos for Shalosh Shudas, but at least, so have fruits and vegetables Shabbos afternoon. You may also know, some say squeeze 2 meals into before 10:45 a.m. Has anyone heard that before? I didn't put that in our guide, but some say if you want to be extra strict and careful, have 2 meals before 10:45 a.m. Now, there's a major kasha on that from the Gemara we just saw. I'll repeat myself. I'm already going, we're going to go over. Some say you can have 3 meals, have 1 Friday night and 2 meals before 10:45 a.m. Problem is that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says you only leave over chametz for 2 meals. So we'll leave that as a question on that opinion. But my point is that according to Rashi and others, we don't have Shalosh Shudas. We can't fulfill the mitzvah this week. According to the accepted approach, we do it in a very b'diavad, non-ideal fashion. We have fruits and vegetables, even though that's not really a proper way to have Shalosh Shudas. So the question is as follows. Many commentaries find it surprising that the rabbis imposed these restrictions, even though it would mean we cannot properly celebrate Shabbos. And let me add to that question. Although I said there's no prohibition to eat Friday afternoon, that's not totally true. The halacha is that there is a restriction on Friday. You may not have a large celebratory meal on Friday. You can have your regular meals on Friday. But if, let's say, it's not right to schedule a graduation party with a big, humongous barbecue Friday afternoon, you shouldn't have a large celebratory meal on Friday. But for a Sudas mitzvah that falls out on that day, there's a bris that day, or has happened this year, it's Purim that day. So for a mitzvah, you can have a large meal. But when it comes to the prohibition of Erev Pesach, where the rabbi said you can't eat in the afternoon, that's it. They made no exception for Sudas mitzvah, even though it will, so to speak, I don't want to say ruin Shabbos, but not let us celebrate Shabbos properly. We don't allow it. And again, let's combine it with question number 2. What is the whole reason of this prohibition? It's a fence, so because we might not do a mitzvah with a Heir mitzvah. Because we're worried about not doing a Heir mitzvah, we impose a fence that prevents us from doing a real mitzvah that we're obligated to do, Shalosh Shudas? Yes, Ezra. The balance seems a little bit out of balance, but yes, Ezra, what do you want to say?
Question about what is different about the matzah. I mean, you might say no other Yantif meal or Shabbos meal do we have. It's actually commemorating. I mean, it has historical significance, right? It's actually, we're eating it. We're sort of. It is something that was eaten at a particular time, and we're of that moment somehow.
So, I mean, you can give such, arguments that you're basically giving a reason why the Seder is very, very important, which it is. Again, it still leaves us a little bit wanting, but why is it so important that you have an appetite? I get that it's a hit or mitzvah to have an appetite, but.
No, I guess I would say it's like makes the meal distinct. It stands out, right? So like when else do we have like a meal that we're commemorating? But if you're just continuously eating, then the meal doesn't stand out as sort of like as.
That's an interesting formulation. I'll send it to you later. The Rambam actually formulates it something like that, but I'm going to have a different theory and approach. It doesn't mean what you said is wrong at all, but I'd like to offer something in addition.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
All right. So you mentioned Fridays. You can make exceptions with, if you have well, what do you do with a Sudas mitzvah that falls out on a Shabbos that's Erev Pesach? Like you have a bris or a pidyon ben or something.
You would have to do it before the last 3 hours of the day, meaning the unique prohibition of Pesach, which is only on the last 3 hours, at least.
And if you can't, for whatever reason, the moel can't get there before noon or whatever.
I think you wouldn't have the meal. We wouldn't have a meal. We would say also have fruit and vegetable, even though that's not really a nice way to celebrate it, but that's the most you can do. Okay. So we're now going to leave these questions, and we're going to turn to the other rabbinic prohibition of not eating matzah on Erev Pesach. This prohibition, although everyone holds of it, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, there's really no explicit reference to it in the Talmud Bavli. Its source is the Talmud Yerushalmi. And so I'm now going to share my screen to learn that together, and let us all daven that I don't have problems with this. Here we go. Yeah, the same thing happened again, but we'll figure it out. Okay. Shalmi. This passage has quite a provocative formulation, and if you haven't seen it before, it might be quite striking. But let's do it together. Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi said, Rabbi Levi was right at the borderline of the Mishnah Gemara. Ha'ochel matzah b'erev Pesach. Someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach, keba ala rusaso b'beis chamav. It is like a betrothed man who has sexual relations with his betrothed future wife, b'beis chamav, while she still is living in his father-in-law's home. Okay, quite a provocative comparison. The habal arusaso b'beis chamav loka, and indeed such a person is deserving of lashes. This is the source. We'll come back to that initial key line, but let's continue and finish the passage. Tani Rav Yehuda ben Beseira. This is the famous ben Beseira family. No connection to the original story that I shared. Rav Yehuda ben Beseira taught, Omer, Bein chametz, bein matzah aser. Rav Yehuda ben Beseira said, not only is it forbidden to have matzah all day, it's even forbidden to eat chametz all day Erev Pesach. Now, the commentaries explain the reason for this is that Rav Yehuda ben Beseira explicitly holds that the Karban Pesach may be offered immediately the morning of the 14th, and thus the prohibition of chametz also begins from the morning. Okay, let us continue. Rabbi Simon b'shem Yeshua ben Levi said the following. Rebbe, again, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, lo haya ochel lo chametz v'lo matzah. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the codifier of the Mishnah, Erev Pesach, would not eat anything. He wouldn't have chametz, he wouldn't have matzah. Lo matzah, he wouldn't have matzah. Min hada Rabbi Levi, because of Rabbi Levi's statement of this, extreme comparison to habal rusaso, someone who has relations with his betrothed. V'lo chametz, min hada Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and he didn't have chametz because he held like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Gemara says, wait a second. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who says you can't have chametz from the morning, that's not the accepted opinion. The Rebbe Talmidei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Havel. Was Rebbe a student of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that he would follow him in this regard, not to eat chametz even in the morning? Lo, Talmidei Rabbi Yehuda ben Kuzdai Havi. He was a Talmud of another scholar, another sage. Ella, rather, why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi fast on Erev Pesach? If you haven't looked ahead, someone you can shout out. Unfortunately, I can't see you right now. Why? What's another reason why maybe he fasted on Erev Pesach?
The Bachor.
He was a Bachor. Ella begin to Havi Bachor. He was a firstborn. That's why he fasted. Totally different reason. Amar of Tanchuma. Rav Tanchuma said, no, lo min hada. No, that's not the reason. It's not because he was a Bechor. A different suggestion of why Yehuda Hanasi would fast on Pesach, Erev Pesach. Al min hada, for this reason. Rebbe Istanis Havi. He was finicky. He had a sensitive stomach. Kad achol biyamama lo avi achol baramsha. And if he would eat during the day, he had trouble eating at night. V'lama lo avi achol. So why wouldn't he eat? Hacha biyamama in the daytime. Kidei shiakanes bitava. So he would have an appetite. For most of us, it's enough to refrain the last 3 hours of the day. But Yehuda Hanasi apparently to have an appetite all day seems kind of extreme, but that's what it says. We'll come back to that, but now let's go back to the initial statement. Why can't you eat matzah on Erev Pesach? It doesn't say so you'll be excited the Seder night, although some add that. The Talmud Yerushalmi's comparison is that someone who eats someone who eats matzah on Erev Pesach is keba ala rusaso, is like someone who's having relations with his betrothed wife before they are fully married, when it obviously is still prohibited. What is the comparison? What is the equation? So on the one hand, there obviously is some kind of equation. You can't control yourself, and you're taking something too early, enjoying something too early before is totally permitted. The Rishonim already write that matzah on Erev Pesach we're like betrothed to it, because on Erev Pesach, once sort of chametz has already become forbidden, so we're also already sort of directed towards the matzah, but it's not yet the right time. It's not yet the night of the 15th. So there's this intermediary state. It's like betrothal and not full marriage. But there seems to be something more here. Does anyone? I'm just curious. What are people's reactions to this equation between eating chametz on Erev Pesach is like kabbalah rusa sov beis chamav. It's like having relations with a betrothed person before the marriage is complete. Any thoughts? Anyone see where this may be pointing? Can everyone still hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
There was, I remember learning that there's a statement somewhere in the Gemara that in Yerushalayim, they had a practice of the Chatan moving into his father-in-law's house before they were able to have relations, so that they could learn
used to each other. This is it's the Gemara Masech Kesubos. Yeah.
So obviously they were that from that opinion.
So you're saying they're a little too dangerously close. But at the end of the day, he did something wrong. They weren't supposed to do that.
Well, he wasn't supposed to have sex with her. I mean, yeah, but
right.
But
okay,
they were less
what
worried
does
about it.
What does that have to do with matzah on Erev Pesach? Okay, so let us continue.
Is this like leading up to Shavuot, so to speak, in marriage and
that's not where I'm going exactly. Not where I'm going. Let's continue. So the first really piece of the puzzle here that will help us unlock this comes from the Rokeach. Rabbi Elazar Rokeach. He was of the Hasidei Ashkenaz, the German pietist. He lived in the 12th to 13th century. Major figure in all areas of Torah. He was a major scholar of Talmud, posek. He was a major makubal, a Kabbalist. He was a poet and wrote liturgy, and he wrote ethical works. And so perhaps his most well-known work is the Rokeach, which is a halachic work. And he writes as follows. B'minhagim shel Rabbi Shlomo Matzasi. I found in the customs of Rabbi Shlomo, that means Rashi, Shlomo ben Yitzchaki, and this indeed is found in the Machzor Vitri. Hukshu matzos lePesach. There's an equation, this is found in the Gemara, between matzah and Pesach. One application is, the Amar Rava said, Achol matzah b'zman hazeh, acher chatzos. If you eat your matzah after midnight, the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lo yatzidei chavaso. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says the carbon Pesach must be eaten before midnight, so too matzah must be eaten before midnight. Okay, matzah follows the rules of carbon Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says as follows. Va'asar lechol matzah mibodio. And it is forbidden to eat matzah when it is still day, meaning Erev Pesach. Kodem she'kadish v'yomar haggadah v'halal, before you say the Seder. Why can't you eat matzah on Erev Pesach? So he cites Yushalmi. He gives his own reason. Shenemar, as the verse says, Ba'erev tochlu matzos, and you shall eat the matzah in the evening, in the nighttime. The commentaries on Shulchan Aruch say it seems like the Rokeach is saying, he's trying to sort of infer from the pasuk. It's as if the pasuk said you should eat the matzah at night and not during the day. At night and not before. Now, the commentaries say the pasuk doesn't really imply that. There is no real Torah prohibition to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. But they point out that he seems to be modeling it after the following halacha, which is true by the Karban Pesach. This is in the Gemara, but we'll read the Rambam's formulation. Achol mimenu kazayus slimi ba'odio. If someone eats an olive's volume of the roasted Karban Pesach as it should be prepared, mi ba'odiom, again when it's still Erev Pesach on the day of the 14th, of course you don't fulfill the mitzvah, which is only at night. But not only do you not fulfill the mitzvah, avar al mitzvahs aseh, you are violating. You are in violation of a positive Torah command. Shnemar, as the verse says, again, the Gemara spells this out. V'achlu es habasar b'layla hazeh. The Torah repeats several times, you must eat the meat at night. V'achlu es habasar b'layla, you shall eat the meat of the carbon at night. B'layla v'lo b'yom, you must eat it, you are permitted only to eat it at night and not during the day. You are not allowed to preemptively eat your carbon Pesach on the day of the 14th. V'lav haba mechlala se asehu. And a negative inference derived from a positive commandment has the force of a positive commandment, meaning it's a Torah law. In other words, for the Karban Pesach, there is a Torah prohibition to eat it early. which made me realize something very interesting. This is absolutely unique in the world of karbanos. For any carbon, you offer it on whatever day, and then it is permitted, and in fact, you're supposed to eat it then, that day, right? You're not supposed to delay. Don't leave it over. The Karban Pesach is unique in that you offer it on the day of the 14th, you shecht it and sprinkle the blood. You would cook it and roast it and prepare it, and it would be all ready. And let's say you were in you got an early slot. So you shechted, you did everything at 1 p.m. in Yerushalayim. And it's not going to be nightfall until 7 or 8 now. And it's all ready, and it smells delicious, and the Karban Pesach is right there. So of course, you can't fulfill the mitzvah until the night. But not only that, it is forbidden to eat. You must wait. Karban Pesach is unique in that there is this gap, this delay that you offer it, and then you're forced to wait. Perhaps the idea that is meant to capture is that what is the essence of Erev Pesach? Erev Pesach, the day that we offer the Karban Pesach, is the eve of Pesach. It is the eve of the night of redemption. The redemption has been promised. We know it's coming, but we're not there yet. In many ways, it does parallel the experience of the Jews in Egypt. They said, go in your homes. And God said, don't worry, you will be leaving. But for now, you sit there and you wait. When it'll be time to go, it'll happen right away. But there's a delay between the promise, between the expectation, and the redemption actually happening. And that's exactly how the Karban Pesach is offered and is celebrated. And again, this is absolutely unique in the world of karbanos. You offer it, and then there is a forced period of waiting. When you're waiting, you're wanting to eat the Karban Pesach, but you cannot until the night. My contention is that Rabbi Levi felt, or whoever enacted that you can't eat matzah, they understood that this is part of the experience of Pesach. There was an aspect, an element of waiting built into the Torah mitzvah of offering the Karban Pesach, because you would offer it and then you had to wait. But once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, once there was no Karban Pesach, that element of celebrating Pesach disappeared. And Rabbi Levi, following the model of the Torah mitzvah of the Karban Pesach, and in that spirit, said we should reenact that with the matzah, that the matzah also, Erev Pesach, just like it is forbidden to eat the Karban Pesach early, we will say it is forbidden to eat matzah early. And you may want to eat matzah, there's not a whole lot more to eat, but you have to wait. There's a prohibition that will only be released the night of the Seder. It is only released with reading the Haggadah, with the performance of the mitzvah. So rabbinically, the idea behind not eating matzah on Erev Pesach, yes, it's also to create excitement. It's not a contradiction to how it's generally presented. But the point, that's the whole point. The whole point is that we're going to force you to wait, to want it, to see it and want it, but not yet have it. And that is the essence of Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is before the redemption. We see it, we know what is coming, but we do not have it yet. That's like the betrothed. They're promised one to another. There's this period of betrothal. Erev Pesach is the betrothal. Our with God, there's a promise of redemption, but it has not been actualized yet until the night. That is my explanation based on the Rekeach of the prohibition to eat matzah. Now we're going to take that and go back to the general prohibition to eat anything, Pesach, Erev Pesach afternoon in just a moment. But any thoughts or reactions to anything that I just said? And I apologize right now, I can't see you, so just please unmute and share anything if you'd like.
Can you eat something with matzo meal in it, like matzo balls or cake?
Excellent question. So matzo balls, yes, since it's cooked, since it's so different, I mean, it's boiled, so different than matzah that you'll use at the Seder, that's already different. If matzo meal is a small ingredient, like in a potato kugel, gefilte fish, that would also be fine. But if you rebake it into something that would be mazonos, like a cookie, that's more questionable and generally is, generally people don't do that. Okay, sure. All right, so now let us return to—
Rabbi,
yes.
In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there is no prohibition to eat other mutton before the Korban Pesach. It's only to eat the Korban itself. So maybe you should say just, you can't eat the Matzah Shel Mitzvah early. I get that. But we don't have a parallel prohibition with the Korban.
You're right. It's not exactly parallel. And that's why on a Torah level, the prohibition doesn't apply to matzah. But you can't really do that. It's not, you can't find an exact parallel because the Korban Pesach, you're assigned to a Korban Pesach. That is your Korban Pesach. It must be the Korban Pesach halachically that you'll use for the mitzvah. And so there's a prohibition to eat that early. Matzah, you could say, oh, I plan on using that box, but you're never forced to use that box. You could always use a different box. So it's just impossible. So the only thing really we could enact was you can't eat matzah. You could say it's only matzah that is fit to fulfill the mitzvah, which we do accept the halacha, but you can't limit it to any particular matzah. I hope that answered your question, Mike. If not, let me know. Yeah. Okay. All right.
It does seem to be a big discrepancy in anticipating eating a roasted lamb versus eating a piece of dry matzah, though.
I hear, okay, that we can't recreate. That's a problem. But for the halachic man and halachic woman, I'm sure they don't have such taste bud issues. I'm sure eating matzah is like eating the Korban Pesach. Let us go to the next source. We saw that there's a prohibition. Again, we learned to eat in the end of the afternoon on Erev Pesach. Rashi said, so you'll have an appetite to eat the matzah. The Gemara recounts as follows. Rav Sheshes have a Yasef Batani. So Rav Sheshes would fast Erev Pesach. Kol Mali Yom Pesach, every Erev Pesach. Just like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did. The Gemara asks, why would he fast? He says this reason, that reason. The Gemara concludes, like the Talmud Yerushalmi, Shani Rav Sheshes de Isnis Hava. Rav Sheshes also was finicky, he had a sensitive stomach. The Itam Betzafar Midi, if he would eat in the morning, Lo Orta, Lo Havi Mahani Le Uchla. He would not enjoy food at night. He wouldn't have an appetite. So again, he wanted to make sure he had an appetite. So even though the prohibition for everyone is only the last 3 hours, but if you know you're not going to have an appetite, so you shouldn't eat, you'll have an appetite. Rava, Havishasa Chamra Kuli Mali Yom Pesach. Rava would drink wine, must have been not too strong, all day Erev Pesach. Why? Ki heichi denigere lelibe, to increase his appetite. Apparently, drinking a lot of wine increases your appetite. Denechol matzah tfei leorta, and so he would have a greater desire to eat matzah the night of the Seder. Here we see Rava going even further. Rava, and this we certainly find nowhere else. Rava was not concerned, oh, if I eat this, then I won't have an appetite. Rava specifically wanted to increase his appetite more than his natural appetite. He wanted to be hungrier than he naturally would have been on Erev Pesach. The Rambam's formulation quoted in this Gemara is that Chacham and Rishonim, our early sages, they would starve themselves on Erev Pesach. Why? Now we're going so much further than saying, oh, we don't want you to be stuffed. So you won't be able to eat it with an appetite you want to enjoy. Here we seem to be saying, we want you to, in the spirit of the law, we can't impose this on everyone. But the great sages, they would make themselves so hungry. They would want to be so hungry on Erev Pesach. So what I would like to suggest is as follows. Similar to the specific prohibition of eating matzah, that they want there to be a delay. We want you to be wanting something. We want there to be a desire on Erev Pesach, because it is the eve of the redemption, is when we don't yet have it. It is there and we want it. We see it, but we don't yet have it. So similarly, Chazal specifically on Erev Pesach, you might wonder, on Erev Pesach, there are all these rules. So some people say, there's nothing to eat, I'm starving. So what I'm telling you is, my suggestion is, that is exactly what Chazal wanted. Chazal wanted us to be hungry. On one level, yes, so we'll eat and enjoy and have an appetite. But on a deeper level, the reason is because, again, that is the essence of what Erev Pesach is supposed to be, yearning for something that we do not yet have. And I believe this answers all of our questions. First of all, obviously, this is unique to Pesach. It would not apply to Shabbos. There's no such idea of the eve of the redemption and then gaining the redemption. There's no parallel to the Korban Pesach of Mitzrayim. It wouldn't apply to Sukkot. But it also explains why the sages imposed a prohibition on Erev Pesach not to eat in the afternoon, even though it was only to quote unquote ensure a Heir mitzvah, and even though it overrides and imposes upon us an inability to properly celebrate Shabbos, is for the following reason. This is not offense. It's not offense. It's not, oh, we say don't eat lest you come to eat with too full of a stomach. No, just the opposite. The essence of the mitzvah is to come in wanting, just like the on a Torah level, the Korban Pesach, the Torah said, make it, and then you have to wait for it and want it. So too on every Seder, on some level, Chazal wanted us to be hungry, to want it. And imposing restrictions on what we can eat on Erev Pesach, that's not a fence to protect Pesach night, the Seder night. That is a way to properly capture the spirit of the day of Erev Pesach. It's not just for Pesach night. Chazal say we're putting restrictions on you on Erev Pesach because Erev Pesach is the day when you're supposed to feel that I'm not yet complete. I don't have it. I don't have what I want. I want the redemption. I'm yearning for something, reaching for something. And so when Erev Pesach is Shabbos, there actually is a great contradiction. We couldn't let you have 3 meals on Shabbos. 3 meals on Shabbos is supposed to represent completion, wholeness, having everything that I want and more. The third meal is an extra on top of it meal. To allow for Suda Shabbos and 3 meals and Shalosh Shudas, that would totally contradict. It is in total contradiction to the essence of the day of Erev Pesach, which is meant to be a day of when we have the promise, we don't yet have the redemption, a day where we're not yet complete. We don't have everything that we want. It's the day of awaiting and acting. And thus that to some degree is a contradiction to the experience of Shabbos. The commentaries on Shulchan Aruch, meant to quote this earlier, quote that in the Zohar says that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai would also not eat Shalosh Shudas. And he specifically would learn the afternoon of Shabbos Erev Pesach, great mystical secrets, in place of Shalosh Shudas. Now, normally you can't fulfill Shalosh Shudas by learning Kabbalah. But it seems like on that Shabbos, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai wanted to proactively demonstrate we are not eating Shalosh Shudas. We're doing something in place of Shalosh Shudas. Because in some ways, when Shabbos is Erev Pesach, even though there is this contradiction of what will win out, the sense of completeness and wholeness of Shabbos, or the sense of expectation and not quite there-ness of Erev Pesach, but on Shabbos, there's almost a greater fulfillment of the spirit of the day. When it is clear that we are being restricted, when it is clear that we don't have everything we should have or would want to have, i.e. the 3 Shabbos meals. So that almost accentuates the essence of the day, and hopefully that leads to an even greater, a higher, a more elevated Seder night. Because if we sort of want it more, if we feel the lack more, then, so to speak, the redemption of the Seder night is even greater. I will conclude our main presentation with just 2 small points. I won't read it, but you can look in Tosfos. This entire perspective, I believe, can shed light on the fast of the firstborn in general. It's a little unclear the exact sources and reasons for the fast of the firstborn. It obviously is connected to Makas Bachoros, and the Jewish firstborns were saved, so to speak. But why specifically did the custom develop to commemorate that, to commemorate it with a fast? But perhaps it is tied into this, because if Erev Pesach is the day of not yet redeemed, again, it is a joyous day because we have the promise of redemption, but we're not yet redeemed. So we're still in a state of somewhat danger, of vulnerability. So it is appropriate to try to capture that aspect with the fast, to remember that at this point in time, we are, so to speak, in danger. The firstborns were, so to speak, in spiritual danger and needed to be saved. Because again, the Savior doesn't come, and our experience of the Savior and the salvation doesn't come until Seder night. Conclude with one final source, and this we will see together in person. We'll read it together. Again, what I'm trying to argue, and hopefully I've convinced you, is that again, the spirit of the day is when we're, so to speak, supposed to be physically hungry, and that's supposed to capture and help us have the experience of yearning of wanting something, of realizing we are not yet there. And then the pleasure of getting it is part of the experience of the Seder night and the actualization of the redemption. And there were certain sages who would fast on Erev Pesach, but to some degree that is meant to be the feeling experience of us all. It's not a bug, so to speak, that we're hungry on Erev Pesach. What I'm trying to argue is that it's a feature, and that all of these halachos, the Torah halacha of not eating chametz from midday on, the rabbinic prohibition of not eating matzah the entire day, the rabbinic prohibition of not having much food at all in the end of the day, all of that is to create the feature that we are hungry on Erev Pesach. Halachmanya. Halachmanya de'achlu avasana ba'arda Mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction ancestors ate in Egypt. Kol dichvin yesei v'yechol, kol ditzrech yesei v'yifsach. Whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come and celebrate Pesach with us. Whoever isn't hungry, come and eat. To whom does that refer? How do we normally understand that? We call out, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Well, who's hungry? Anyone just call out?
Poor people.
Poor people, exactly. Okay, that's what I always thought. But many of our medieval commentaries give a different explanation. Kol dichvin yesei v'yechol. All who are hungry, come and eat. Okay, so we got the interpretation that we've heard every other year. Based on this entire shiur, who is the Haggadah referring to when it calls out, all who are hungry, come and eat? Who are those people?
Everybody.
Everybody.
Anybody who starved themselves on Erev Pesach.
Yeah, which is what we're all supposed to be doing.
Right.
Look at these two commentaries, the Avud Raham and the Shibbolei Halakha. Avud Raham lived in the 14th century in Spain. Shibbolei Halakha lived a century earlier in Germany. Different times, different Jewish communities. The Avud Raham first says, Kol mi shehiriv atzm. What does it mean, whoever's hungry, let him eat? That refers to Kol mi shehiriv atzm be'erev Pesach. All those who made themselves hungry in Erev Pesach. K'dei lechol matzah b'tiyavon. In order to eat matzah with an appetite. Yavo v'yochol miyad. Come and eat. And then he incorporates the prohibition of eating in general, this language of having an appetite. Sha'asr lechol matzah be'erev Pesach. Because you can't eat matzah all day. As the quote from the Talmud Yushalmi, equivalent to the betrothed and the betrothed violating that prohibition. Or the second paragraph. Kol adam yariv asmo be'erva pesach michamesh sha'os ulamala. All those who made themselves hungry from the 5th hour on. That is even more interesting. The 5th hour on, that's a reference to when chametz becomes prohibited. We're tying together all three prohibitions in the commentaries. Not to eat in the afternoon, to have a taiva, to have a te'avon, the prohibition of eating matzah, the prohibition of eating chametz from 10:45 a.m. Kol adam sheyariv atzmo be'erva pesach mechamesh sha'os ulamala. All those who made themselves hungry from the 5th hour and on when chametz became forbidden. To have an appetite for matzah. Mehada Rava, as Rava taught us, he would have wine to increase his appetite. That's who these Seder is referring to. Kol dichvin yesei v'yechol. All of us who have been hungry, who have been waiting, who have been yearning, let us now come and celebrate. The time has come. The Geula has arrived. It is the Seder. Now matzah is permitted. Now we can eat however much we want. Now we can celebrate. What if hopefully we have tried to discover, clarify. Erev Pesach, we ask, why are there so many restrictions? Why did our sages make us be hungry? And even more so on this year when it's Shabbos, why do they not let us celebrate Shabbos properly? The answer is that this is how they viewed the day. Erev Pesach was the day the Jews were promised redemption, but it was the eve of the redemption. They did not yet have it yet, and they had to wait for it. And the Karban Pesach is prohibited to eat Erev Pesach. The Torah says you have to wait for it. And so they wanted to create that experience for us, and without saying it explicitly, point us in that direction. The Erev Pesach is the day that we are not yet complete. We can see the better future, but it's not yet in our hand. And so we are yearning for, we are hungering for, and that is meant to be parallel with an actual physical hunger, which makes us want to get to the matzah and want to eat it. Last Pesach, we were entering a period for the world of Avdus. We had a new master. The master was the coronavirus. And that master would not let us move, restricted our freedoms, and it was more powerful than us. This year, unfortunately, we're not yet quite in the time of redemption. We have not been totally saved. We have not yet been totally redeemed. But perhaps we can see Pesach this year as a kind of Heir of Pesach experience, meaning hopefully, I think most of us, we see a better future, better, if not perfect, on the horizon. And we are more optimistic, but we're not quite yet there yet. The salvation has not yet quite arrived. So we are happier, we are more positive, but we are still waiting, we are still yearning. We're almost there. It is the eve of the redemption. And so we, of course, we hope Pesach will usher in even more quickly that redemption. We hope that we will see that redemption and that salvation for the world as soon as possible. It's been 1 year or so, more than 1 year, and it's hard to believe. And I want to thank everyone who is here this evening. You are people that are important parts of the shul. Everyone who participates, who contributes with their presence, whether it's physically in shul or your Zoom presence. This is what has sustained the shul, and it's given the ability of the shul to sustain and support others during this year. And we hope we're almost there. We hope we are almost at the Zman Hagul, at the time of the redemption. So I want to thank everyone for making time tonight, and I encourage everyone as we get closer and closer to the Geula, we'll each experience it a little bit differently. The Geula of vaccination, when the time is right, hopefully more and more people are able to join us physically in shul, but we all should continue to contribute, to support one another, to support the shul, to support the community which sustains us all. And I hope our learning together will give all of us some added perspective on Erev Pesach and the excitement leading up to Pesach, yearning, hungering for the Seder. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Seder, wherever you are, with whomever you will be. And I want to wish everyone a Chag Kasher Sameach and a wonderful Yontif. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, for your questions, for your participating. And it was a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Chag Sameach. That was lovely.
Thank you very much,
Excellent.
Linda. Yasher koach, everyone.
Rabbi.
Chag Sameach.
Do you think the constraints on Erev Pesach of eating matzah would have been different if the rabbis had tongues? All these delicate constitutions.
You never know. You never know.
This is great, though. Thank you so much. It's
Thank you,
wonderful to
Tamar.
see everyone.
Thank you, Tamar. Okay,
Thank
good night,
you,
everyone.
everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Go on.